I spent 3.5 years from I was 9 to about 12 and a half studying on and off, teaching myself Morse code and teaching myself electronic theory, and to the point where I got to have an amateur radio license, which was a big thing. Because I grew up in a world where at night I was fairly by myself, and in school more or less lonely, and I discovered the world through radio. And these days you just have to turn a computer on, you can connect somebody, there's no licensing, no anything, you just talk. During the year that I first discovered voice on the internet, I was commuting to New York City, and I read the newspaper, and I found a columnist who was very passionate about video on the internet back then, and that led to me to discovering voice. And so in February '95, I downloaded some software. It was the original iPhone, by the way. I know iPhone's from Apple, no. Actually, the original iPhone domain came from a company called Vocaltech. And they had software that lets you talk on the internet. Not necessarily with anybody who you know. WA2BOT was my social identifier. The license the Federal Communications Commission gave to me. CQ it really comes from Morse code, with the letter C, the letter Q, representing seek you, or seeking a contact. And in fact, any of you remember or have ever used ICQ? That was built by some lonely developers. Because it's loneliness and laziness that drives much innovation. And so, but back in the day of ICQ, there was iPhone, and I downloaded this software, and what was very fascinating was from the moment I went online, I used my ham radio call sign as my social media ID, so I was WA2BOT. What was amazing was, on that particular day, about 20% of the people who were online were using their ham radio call signs too. And here we were, in a very awkward situation, pretending to be on the radio, but using a computer. And so I would be saying we would be talking as if we're on radio, but it was clearly we're on the computer. But in a very short period of time, I discovered, wow, this is fun. So I took my evenings, and I started to write about this internet phone. And I created a mailing list very quickly, and I built community. And for about a year or so, I did this just for fun while I had a day job. Put me on the spotlight on me, which was called Free World Dial-Up. I had this crazy idea that if we had computers and you had an extra telephone line, that you might want to let a total stranger make a phone call through your home because you could. And it turned out hundreds of people from around the world loved the idea, and they all set up nodes. And I was working with a guy from Indonesia who I never met, Isaac Jenny, and he and I, and then ultimately Brandon Lucas out of Tokyo, we ran Free World Dial-Up. And the idea was to enable people to talk for free around the world. We were just having fun. There was no business. But oh my God, by November, December 1995, I was written up in everything from Time Magazine to the Sunday Times of London. And it was funny reading these articles about the threat that Free World Dial-Up had to the future of British BT. It was funny. We had no threat. We had no business. We were just having fun. But that's where I first understood that I was being disruptive. I wasn't being a jerk. I was just being disruptive. I was having fun. And with this notoriety, a lot of things happened. In March of 1996, which you might discover if you go through these pleadings, you'll find that 300 phone companies in America got together, filed a petition at the FCC, which was known as the ACTA petition, and they asked for two simple things: the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America, and the makers of the software to be regulated as phone companies. And I read this, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was really funny. And this happened in March of '96, and what I didn't realize was that hundreds of people over the next 3 days would email me asking what I, Jeff Pulver, was going to do about the ACTA petition. Now, at that moment in time, I had no standing in Washington. Okay, I had a ham radio license, but I wasn't a lobbyist. I didn't know anything about the political process. I never ran for office. I never authored legislation. I had no idea. But in 10 days' time, I created what was called the Voice on the Net, or the VON Coalition. And I got from the mailing list that I had created the year before, I found 110 companies, some very big, some very small, from around the world, but mostly in the U.S., got together to say no to the silliness. And to this day, the ACTA petition was never formally acted upon, but the ACTA petition was not granted either. And that was my reference point. But what I ended up doing by accident was creating the VON Coalition, which is today a 501c6 nonprofit lobbying organization in Washington, D.C., which for 9 years kept voice over IP unregulated in America. And I learned that if you go out, find the regulators and educate them, maybe they won't regulate you. Maybe they won't have a knee-jerk reaction and try to do something drastic just because somebody says that their meal ticket is being threatened. It was, in fact, the advent of the Pulver Order that helped things like Skype get sold to eBay. I know this because I went to see Tim Draper in 2007, pitching him a startup that I had. And while I was at his offices, he came in, interrupted the meeting I was having, pitching him my startup, and made me tell the story that I just told you. And upon his exit, he took my hand, and he shook my hand. He didn't hug. He shook my hand, and he basically crushed whatever bones I had in my fingers, and my hand hurt. And as he left the door and walked out the room, I jumped back to my presentation for the pitch I was giving for Network 2, and one of the partners said, "Jeff, can you tell me what just happened?" Like, wait, I was trying to pitch them my startup. What is going on? So I said, "What part?" "Oh, you told Tim came in here. You told him Pulver Order." And I said, "Yeah." And he crushed my hand. He said, "Jeff, he wasn't crushing your hand. He was thanking you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, when you were out in Washington trying to make this Pulver Order happen, the Skype board was scared as anything because if you didn't get passed, they didn't know what they were going to do. So he was symbolically thanking you for helping him personally make $500 million." And I was like, okay. And so I know at least somebody benefited from it, but I like to think others did. And at the time, a lot of governments from around the world looked at what the FCC did as public policy to be applied elsewhere. And so, because of the Pulver Order, of interesting things happened for me. I testified in Congress. Stanford Business School did a case study about me. This is only the second time since then that I'm actually talking. Since 2004, this is the first time I've actually come out to really talk about the Pulver Order. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. But it's that whole process of not knowing you can't do something that enables you to do anything. When we started Vonage, I'll tell you that we had nobody on the team that knew anything about telecom. Because I discovered with other startups that if you hire people who have experience, and it's bad experience, then that negative energy takes everyone down because, you can't do that, can't do that. But if you're clueless, you can do anything. And it turns out when it comes to legislation, you can do anything. In fact, one of the biggest compliments I ever had in my life came about a month after the Pulver Order got passed. I had at the U.S. Senate back then, they were pretty open about stuff, and a senator sponsored a cocktail party in my name at the Senate, and a lobbyist, this big guy from Verizon, comes up to me and says, "Jeff, I need to talk to you." Now, I didn't think he was going to punch me, but he could have, and I was a little leery of him, and he brings me to the corner and he says, "Jeff, I have one thing to tell you." "And what's that?" "You scare us. See, because you don't play by conventional game. You don't play this conventionally, and we don't know how to deal with that." I said, "Thank you." I guess I did the right thing. And when you look at what happened, I was really just standing up as an individual because I felt that the advent of broadband, would be totally disruptive to how things worked. And in fact, subsequently to the success of the Pulver Order, I filed petitions for things that have never gotten passed. After 9/11, I submitted for E911 Phase 3, so that for location-based services, based on if you're in a high-rise, to understand using Wi-Fi technologies, what floor you're on so you can be rescued. Because I actually started working at Cantor Fitzgerald Securities 6 months after they tried to blow up the World Trade Center the first time. And the first time around, back in 92, 93, a lot of people escaped through the 108th floor because they helicoptered off. And we were on the 104, 105, so we were very on the top. And I'm pretty sure some people tried to leave through the upper staircase, but it was chain locked. And had maybe some emergency people could have contacted these people, they at least could have told them, by the way, go downstairs, don't stay upstairs. And then I filed another petition similar to the Pulver Order to protect video on the internet. I discovered early on that voice was an application, and that's sort of what helped define me. I didn't look at voice as a service. I looked at voice as an app, which maybe sounds silly now to say, but in 95 it was pretty revolutionary. And I also looked at video as an app, so that the same way you consume broadcast television, I look at the ability to be a TV promoter, a TV producer, a TV show, the same thing. So I filed a petition at the FCC trying to unregulate TV on the internet. Now, in the interim, Canada CRTC has ruled that video on the internet should be regulated as broadcast TV. The ministry, I believe in Israel, has done the same thing, and so has the EU. America hasn't ruled that way yet. I hope maybe they won't, but they've ignored my stuff. But I do think there are times for people to stand up and to be counted upon, and I think that if voice is an app, video is an app too, and if you get to be disruptive and challenge the status quo, those are good things, because at the end of the day, there are 3 words that I learned how to spell. In other words, I know how to say: fear, greed, and disruption. If you say those words in the right order, you can make millions of dollars. Say in the wrong order, you're just ignored. Whatever industry you're in will be fearful of being disrupted. And the greed comes in because, oh, there's money to be made, yay! And so, if you're a phone company, what is your modus operandi? More likely than not, you're going to take existing laws that existed prior to the invention of the technology, and use it to block that usage of the technology in the industry where you have a dominant leadership position in. I call that bullshit. That's called lobbying. I'm looking for someone to take apart the internet and look at the internet as your bicycle parts. But it is the positive disruptive change that happens due to innovation that moves everybody forward.